Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is AJ from the Paladin Journal, and welcome back to another book review for the Horus Heresy series. Today we're going to be talking about Legion. This is the seventh novel in the series, and it's written by Dan Abnett, who is one of the best writers that Black Library has had over the last 25, 26 years. And he is also the one who kicked off this amazing series with Horus Rising, which was an incredible book. And you know, again, high concept stuff. For my money's worth, this is a really good book, and if anything, it's probably even better than Horus Rising. And there's so much detail that has gone into this novel. There's some really amazing characters, and Dan really gives you a good look into the different factions, how they play off of each other, what different expeditionary fleets are like now, because we've seen so many different ones by this point. And while this is a bit of a prequel novel to the first four or the first five, I would say, it doesn't feel like that, which was a criticism that I had with the last book. But overall, really solid story, great pacing, great characters, and I think it has one of the best finishes of any book in the series so far. So, anyways, let's get down to the nitty-gritty details, and let's talk about the Alpha Legion. Now, we do not meet the Alpha Legion until we're like a fair bit into the story as it kicks off, but their entry is amazing. And throughout the novel, you really get a strong sense for how the Legion functions, which is, one of the main things that you want to see from any of the novels in this series, especially an early foundational novel, which is supposed to build our expectations for the rest of the series. We meet Alfarius, we meet some of his different captains and his different Legion operatives, and we are introduced into the world of Astartes level intrigue and mystery, subterfuge, and spycraft and all of that, which just, it contrasts really strongly with how we've seen the Astartes so far, period. Whether it's 40k, whether it's 30k, we've never really had Astartes as spies until this book came along. And, I've read a fair bit of 40k fiction and even 30k fiction, and I can tell you that this novel stands head and shoulders above the entire field. Because, like I said, it has some really great writing, because there's a very good mesh of the human characters and the Astartes characters. Now, there's a set approach with Black Library authors when writing the Heresy series, where they tackle the Astartes through the lens of their surrounding mortal characters. So over in this book, we have characters like Hurtado Bronzi or Pedro Soneca and Teng Namatjira, and so many others. They're from different levels of rank and seniority within the Imperial Army. And Teng himself is the expedition commander. He's a Lord Commander, basically. So he commands the entire fleet of mortals, and his authority is pretty high, just shy of that of a Primarch. And he's also a seasoned veteran, so there's so much interplay between the egos of him and with Alfarius, and even with respect to the different regiments that he has under his command, like the Geno 52 Chiliad and the Outramars, and I forget another one, whatever, the Zanzibar Horde. Yeah, I believe they're an armored regiment. We don't see much of those two, the Outramars or the Zanzibar Horde, but we get a really good sense for the Geno 52 Chiliad, because not only do we meet their overall commander, Uxor Primus, but we also meet their generals, and we meet their captains, I would say, probably. And it really good sense of how the Imperial Army functions, how the expeditions at large function, how the Astartes function, and that is all of that in parallel to what we've seen with the 63rd expedition in the opening trilogy. It's in contrast with I believe it is the 19th expedition for Fulgrim's fleet that we see in Fulgrim, the novel. And it's pretty amazing, how all of these authors have put in so much different cultural tidbits to make their character stand out. Because the Geno 5 Chiliad, it is kind of like it's not a regiment overall or a formation that draws from all over Terra, but it seems to be drawing a lot of its characters from what we would call the Indian subcontinent, and even from Japan and the surrounding areas, or even some of the other places in between. But we really get a good sense of how the different cultures are, even within the Geno. And that is one of the things that really made me love this book, because the characters, they were fantastic, they're written very well, and there's a contrast in rebelling against authority that we never really got to see with the previous novels. Because in those novels, the expeditions, the Imperial Army commanders, they were largely in cahoots with the Primarchs, and even when they weren't, like with the 63rd expedition, we saw how they were dealt with brutally in the second book, False Gods, towards the end. So this one, it goes into so much more detail, and you know, and they are, like I said, they are the lens through which we see the Alpha Legion in this novel. And the Alpha Legion itself is portrayed so well. We see some of their Astartes in the beginning, but it's all kept in the hush hush. But as the narrative progresses, we see more and more of them. We see not only a Terminator captain, but a battle brother. We see a line captain. We see special operatives. We see Omegon, who is the leader of the Legion's special stealth squad. We see how all of these characters, they function with each other and against each other, depending on what the situation is. And it really helps develop a lot of these different factions within the Imperium at this point, which, I am all for that. And Dan Abnett, in his typical fashion, he goes in the nitty gritty, he goes into the details, and he makes everything connect very naturally. So that makes it such a pleasant experience. And I can say also another reason that this book is so good is because I finished it in less than 2 days. Which, if you contrast with my reread for Descent of Angels in my review yesterday, you can see that that book took me 2.5 months to read, which, is very much an outlier for me. And it was so good to, after that experience, to go through the read for this book and to get it done with so quickly. Because, the story keeps you hooked, the action is always there, and, you never really feel like the characters are blathering, basically, which is good. You want things to be focused, and I can say that while the Imperial factions were all done really well, the anti-Imperium factions, they kind of felt a little by the numbers. The main villains are the Nerthine, who are another deviant culture, deviant human culture, but they're kind of have been taken over by chaos. Although this is not, like the raging chaos field that we know from 40K, this is the more insidious kind. And the entire culture has been contaminated, corrupted, and it has affected all levels of their society. And that is something that, the Alpha Legion has to contend with. That is something with Tengna Majura's army elements have to contend with. And, it's all like, different bits and pieces of the larger tapestry, which I love throughout this book. However, I feel like we could have had a little bit more exploration into the culture, because the overall goal of the crusade at this time, the Great Crusade, is to either eradicate all the deviant human cultures or bring them under the umbrella of the Imperium. So more often than not, we never really get into any kind of a detailed expose, so to speak, of these different cultures, and they all kind of start feeling like they're all the same, because they're just there as villains. They're just like the salad dressing, and we never really delved too much. Although there was some pains taken in this book to counteract that, but I felt again that we never really got to see much of the Nerthine. And I would even actually say that I understood the Saroshi from Descent of Angels better than the Nerthine, and which is amazing, because I didn't really have much of a high opinion of the Soroshi in that book. Whereas for the Nerd Team here, there's so much more, but still, they fell a bit flat. And there's another Xenos component to the novel, which is quite central to the main narrative, the Cabal, as they're called. And I felt that they themselves could have been written with more details, because unless I'm missing it from the memory or whatever, excuse me. This is like mostly the last time we see the Cabal. They may show up again in another story or two, but I don't think they show up again in the novel. And while that has some implications for how much you can identify with the faction, I think here they were written fairly well, but more could have been done with them. And what I really like was that they're a mix of different Xenos species, and that is something you really don't see in 40k, because grand alliances like that, they really never happen. Whether we're talking about 40k or even 30k, and they were something unique. And like after reading this book, my expectation is they're going to be some major players for the rest of the series. But I think that they were just here as a tool to move the Alpha Legion story along, rather than add something substantial of their own, which maybe can be covered in some other future book, or even whenever it's covered again in the Horus Heresy. I would love to see that, because they were an element I really liked. And their main agent, John Chromaticus, I know he shows up quite a bit in the future books, and he has a really unique place in the story of the heresy itself, at large and within the microcosm, because he becomes quite a central figure, as we see from other books down the line. So again, overall, like I said, it has a fantastic story. It delves into some of the hidden mysteries of the Alpha Legion, and it has some really huge implication as well for the future lore, which I thought was handled here really well. And it's handled fairly well also in other books in the series. But as happens with Chaos, and it happens with with 40k in general, things become just generally corrupted, decayed over time. Although that's not quite the right word. People forget things, missions change, and it's just the entropy of the whole thing. And that really colors perceptions, because the 40k Alpha Legion, as we've seen in recent years in different books, they're on the gamut of either being Imperial sympathizers or full-on Chaos worshippers with some gradient in between. But this book is going to tell you why that is, and it is phenomenal, especially like the last few moments with Alfarius. And John Grammaticus himself has like a bittersweet ending in the novel, so that was quite interesting to see. So overall, I have to say, really good book, highly recommended. If you're a fan of the Alpha Legion, you absolutely should be reading this. And what I really like is that these threads are continued quite strongly in future novels and novellas and stuff by different authors. Chris Raitt talks about this stuff. Graham McNeil talks about this stuff. I'm pretty sure Dan Abnett has a few things going on as well. And it's great to see that something so really foundational is carried on and developed even further, which is which makes this one of the best books for so many different reasons. Because you can say that the first 4 books, they are a great jumping off point, but I feel like almost all of these first few books, they are great jumping off points, because they form the absolute basis of everything that's going to come. And this is such a tantalizing look into how the war is going to progress, and what the Alpha Legion's place in the larger scheme is going to be. So again, excellent book, highly recommended, and this is a book you really don't want to miss. So anyways, guys, so that's all for me today. I'm currently reading Battle for the Abyss by Ben Counter, and I don't have as many issues with that book as I did with the Son of Angels. But again, it's not Legion, it's not Fulgrim, it's not Horus Rising either. So I have a not good opinion of that book as well. But I'm finding that I'm less ticked off with it, at least in the opening chapters, as I remember being. So, probably the online discourse over the years has colored my perception a bit, which is part of the reason why I want to read all these novels again to prepare myself for the end of the series, which happened a few months ago. So, anyways. So that's me, guys, with the end of this review. Hope you liked it. Let me know what you think, and be sure to check out my socials, and please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you will. Cheers, guys. Bye. Thank you. Cheers.